Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving into a topic that touches nearly everyone's lives, often in profound and complex ways. Trauma and its recovery. Specifically, we're going to tackle a really important and often misunderstood question. Is forgiveness a necessary step for healing from trauma?
It's a big one.
Yeah. And you've shared a fascinating and deeply personal collection of sources for this deep dive, including excerpts from Amanda Ann Gregory's insightful book, You Don't Need to Forgive, Trauma Recovery on Your Own Terms.
That's right.
This book, it really challenges some long-held beliefs, and our mission today is to kind of extract the most crucial nuggets of knowledge so you can walk away well-informed, whether you're navigating your own journey, supporting a loved one, or maybe working in a helping profession.
And what's fascinating here is how the author, she's a trauma psychotherapist, but also a survivor herself, she opens up about her own experience. She asked her therapist this question they kind of struggled to answer. Do I need to forgive my parents in order to make additional progress in my recovery? Will not forgiving make me feel stuck?
And what did she find?
Well, her journey suggests a different path. She found that significant progress can absolutely be made without ever reaching that point of forgiveness, especially concerning her mother, with whom she had this strong yet negatively impacted attachment.
It gets really interesting right from the start, doesn't it? She shares this stark, personal anecdote, witnessing a fatal motorcycle accident.
Yeah, it's incredibly vivid.
And this intensely emotional moment, surprisingly, led her to feel an emotional void, this profound numbness.
Right, which mirrored her reaction to her father's death years prior. She couldn't cry, couldn't feel grief.
Right. She describes this as her rock bottom, making her question if she was a sociopath, a monster.
Such a deeply personal entry point, and it immediately highlights just how complex trauma responses can be.
Absolutely. So let's get to the core question then. Is forgiveness required?
That's the central theme in these sources, yeah. Is it a requirement for trauma recovery? The author, who experienced childhood physical and emotional neglect, her father's secret family, financial abuse, her mother's gradual emotional disappearance.
Wow.
She found herself making significant recovery progress without forgiving her parents, and that directly challenges a very commonly held belief.
So what does this all mean for someone maybe listening, navigating their own recovery?
Well, the book states it clearly. Forgiveness is not a panacea. It's not a magic cure-all. Neither are any of the other skills shared in the book, by the way.
Okay.
It's presented as an elective choice. That's the key word. Elective.
Meaning
a survivor may choose to forgive or choose not to forgive or, experience something in between and still progress in their recovery. It's their choice.
that's a huge shift in perspective. But it raises an important question, doesn't it? Why is the idea of mandatory forgiveness so pervasive then?
That's what the sources dig into. They suggest that this notion, the idea that forgiveness is required for recovery, is often an opinion held by some clinicians, researchers, scholars.
But not necessarily based on solid evidence.
Exactly. It often lacks strong evidence and sometimes rests on what the book calls ulterior moral or ideological motivations rather than the actual needs of the survivor.
So the bottom line is?
Forgiveness should never be forced, pressured, or encouraged. Period.
Okay. Before we dive deeper into forgiveness itself, maybe we should nail down what trauma actually is. Because the sources highlight that trauma has become a bit of a buzzword, right?
Oh, definitely. It's used very loosely, often incorrectly, and that can distort its clinical meaning. As the psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk put it, after trauma, the world becomes sharply divided between those who know and those who don't.
That's powerful.
But what's also interesting here is the caution against sort of policing how people use the term trauma. Well, while misusing it can invalidate survivors' experiences, trying too hard to correct others might inadvertently minimize, stigmatize, or disown trauma for someone else.
Ah, I see. It's a fine line.
It is. Psychiatrist Peter A. Levine described trauma as perhaps the most avoided, ignored, belittled, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. The goal is really about empowering people to articulate their experiences as they perceive them.
And it's not just about those big T traumas we often think of, like war or natural disasters.
Not at all. The sources introduce the concept of little t traumas. These are more about an accumulation of events or circumstances, often happening in childhood.
Like what kinds of things?
Things like physical, emotional, or financial abuse, or even the absence of vital support and nurturing. It's less about what happened and more about what you took from it, how it changed or affected you.
That really broadens the definition.
It does, and this raises an important point about diagnosis. The book stresses that trauma is not a diagnosis in itself.
Meaning PTSD isn't the whole story.
Exactly. PTSD is not synonymous with trauma. Many survivors don't meet the specific criteria for PTSD, and they often get other diagnoses that don't even mention trauma. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and was a psychologist, he actually defined trauma responses as normal adaptive responses as opposed to pathology. He famously said, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior.
That reframes it completely. Not pathology, but adaptation.
Right. For survivors, trauma is often described as a thief, stealing childhoods, relationships, health, identity, which makes the grieving process one of the hardest points of recovery.
Okay, so if trauma is that complex, what about forgiveness? Let's get clear on what forgiveness is and, just as importantly, what it isn't.
Good idea. The sources clear up some common mix-ups. For example, forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation.
Right, you mentioned that briefly.
Yeah, the book mentions a marriage and family therapist who mistakenly equated the two, suggesting forgiveness meant reestablishing safety and trust.
But that's not always possible, or even advisable.
Exactly. The author points out you can absolutely forgive someone without reconnecting, especially if that person is incapable of being safe or trustworthy.
That makes sense. What other misconceptions are there?
Well, there's the idea of forgiveness as a purely religious concept. A Christian counselor might say forgiveness is a virtue that follows the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
But the book argues that definition can be inaccessible to many survivors. It raises the question, do you need to convert to Christianity to recover from trauma? The implication is, of course not.
It needs to be broader than one specific religious framework.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. Forgiveness is also not a psychological defense mechanism.
Like denial?
Exactly. Not like rationalizing, condoning, or denial. Rationalizing is finding evidence for what you already believe, like the client mentioned who insisted a priest was a good man despite his harmful actions.
Okay.
Condoning means you're basically allowing the offense to continue, and denial is refusing to admit the truth of what happened.
So what is forgiveness then, in this context?
The sources offer this powerful definition. Forgiveness stands on the truth that what happened to me was unfair, it is unfair, and it will always be unfair, but I will have a new response to it.
Wow. So it requires acknowledging the unfairness, not pretending it didn't happen or wasn't bad?
Absolutely. You cannot forgive while you're still in denial.
And this ties back to the idea of it being elective, right?
Perfectly. That elective nature is paramount. We heard about Marcus, the 32-year-old survivor of childhood emotional and verbal abuse.
Yes, his previous therapist pressured him.
Right, pressured him to forgive his father, citing research. And what happened? Marcus emotionally shut down. He stopped expressing anger, looked like a therapy success story on the surface.
But he wasn't actually healing.
Not at all. He was still deeply wounded. When his new therapist explicitly removed forgiveness as a requirement,
What was his reaction?
he cried with relief. And then he could genuinely start working through his trauma.
That story really highlights the potential harm of pushing forgiveness. But what about that research the first therapist mentioned? We need to look at that critically, don't we?
Definitely. The sources urge caution when looking at forgiveness studies. They point out potential issues like location bias.
Meaning?
Many studies are done in specific regions, like the Midwest in the U.S., which might have cultural norms that lean more towards forgiveness than other areas. That could skew the results.
Okay, so the sample isn't necessarily representative.
Exactly. And there's also self-selection bias in what are called convenience samples. People who want to forgive, or who are already leaning that way, might be more likely to volunteer for a study about forgiveness.
So the participants aren't randomly selected. They choose to be there, potentially biasing the outcome.
Precisely. And this connects to a really critical lesson in understanding research generally. Correlation does not imply causation.
The classic example.
Yeah, the ice cream and drowning one. A meta-analysis by Urim Lee and Robert D. Enright found a positive correlation between forgiveness and better physical health.
Which leads to those dramatic headlines like forgive or die.
Right, but correlation isn't causation. Ice cream sales and drowning incidents both go up in the summer, but eating ice cream doesn't cause drowning. There's a third factor, hot weather.
So just because forgiveness and health sometimes improve together doesn't mean forgiveness caused the health improvement.
Exactly. And the problem is the kind of long-term, rigorous studies that could potentially show causation are really expensive and time-consuming, so they're less common.
And then there's the funding issue. Who pays for this research?
Good question. The sources suggest we follow the money. A lot of forgiveness studies are funded by organizations like the John Templeton Foundation and Templeton World Charity Foundation.
And their background is?
They have Christian roots and actively fund research at the intersection of science and religion. They even created the Campaign for Forgiveness research.
So the question becomes, are these truly objective funding sources?
Well, psychologist Sharon Lamb raised that exact point. She compared it to drug companies who do research on the effectiveness of their own products.
Implying a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, she noted these foundations have a vested interest in promoting the value of forgiveness, not the opposite. This naturally influences which studies get proposed, which get funded, and ultimately the data that clinicians and survivors have access to.
Okay, so if forgiveness isn't the key, if it's elective, and the research landscape is complex, what is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for trauma recovery?
Safety. Crystal clear across the sources. Safety.
It makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Your brain prioritizes survival.
Absolutely. Think about slipping on ice. Your focus instantly shifts from, I don't know, your career goals to just not falling and getting hurt. Survival trumps thriving in that moment. And Judith Herman, the psychiatrist and trauma researcher, put it perfectly. The first task of recovery is to establish the survivor's safety. This task takes precedence over all others, for no other therapeutic work can possibly succeed if safety has not been adequately secured.
So any recovery efforts built on a shaky foundation of feeling unsafe, they're just going to collapse.
Pretty much. You have to feel safe. That's survival before you can really focus on recovery, which is thriving.
And the sources gave a really harrowing example of what happens when this is ignored, right? With Charlie?
Yes, that was a tough one. Charlie was pressured by his AA group and sponsor to forgive his emotionally abusive stepfather.
And the result?
The pressure led him to spend more time with the abuser, which led to physical and emotional re-traumatization. He ended up hospitalized with broken bones, and ultimately he relapsed.
God, that's awful. It shows the real-world danger.
It really does. And psychologist Mona Gustafson Affinito noted that people working in domestic abuse are familiar with this victims returning to abusers because they've been advised to forgive.
Which can have fatal consequences.
Tragically, yes. It has led to physical and emotional injury, child abuse, and death. And while some proponents of forgiveness therapy might argue, oh, it's reconciliation, not forgiveness, that's the issue when safety is missing.
The sources say that distinction doesn't really matter when someone's life is at stake.
Exactly. A debate over semantics doesn't hold much weight when a recommendation to forgive could lead to a survivor's death. When forgiveness is dangerous, it should not be a part of recovery. It's that stark.
And safety isn't just physical, is it?
No, absolutely not. The sources emphasize that all forms of felt safety are equally vital. Physical, yes, but also emotional, sexual, financial, relational.
Feeling safe enough to be honest about your feelings without being shut down or manipulated.
Precisely. Without invalidation. And this sense of safety, it's dynamic. It's not like a switch you flip on and it stays on.
Like the cat example.
Yeah, like a cat gets startled by a noise, jumps, but then assesses the situation, realizes it's okay, and settles back down for a nap. We can learn to reestablish that sense of safety and shift our focus back towards thriving, towards recovery.
Okay, so once safety is established, what's next? What's critical then?
A huge piece is being seen, heard, and believed.
That sounds fundamental.
It is. The author shares a really powerful personal story about this. When she was 40, an orthopedic surgeon looked at an X-ray of her knee and immediately identified an untreated childhood injury.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. And that simple act of recognition, of seeing the evidence of her past pain, it validated her experience in a profound way.
And that's crucial for survivors.
Absolutely critical. Because so many have been silenced, minimized, manipulated, shamed, gaslit, or accused of lying. Forgiveness itself can sometimes be used as another tool to silence them.
Like telling someone to forgive and move on, essentially dismissing their pain.
Exactly. As Cheryl Richardson said, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. That validation is key.
Okay, so let's talk about emotions in recovery. Anger often gets a really bad rap, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Our society tends to label it as negative, something broken that needs fixing.
But the sources argue differently.
Yeah, they argue that anger is actually a valuable emotion. It's
Not.
not uniquely harmful. Like any emotion, the healthiest place is usually moderation, but it serves important purposes.
How can anger be valuable? What's its function?
Well, it's described as a gift from nature that helps us to protect ourselves and others. It's part of that fight response, often fueled by underlying fear.
So it's protective.
Yes. And beyond personal protection, it also drives social change. Martha Nussbaum writes about how it signals that the oppressed recognize the wrong done to them, how it motivates protest against injustice, and how it can be an expression of truth.
And specifically in trauma recovery.
In trauma recovery, anger can act as both a protector and keymaster.
Protector and keymaster, how so?
It can shield us, protect us from overwhelming emotions like deep grief or fear until we're actually safe enough, resourced enough to feel them. Okay, so it holds them at bay.
Right. And then, when the time is right, when we feel safer, that same anger can act as the key to unlock that deeper pain, allowing us to process it.
That's a really different way of looking at anger. The story of Abigail, the mass shooting survivor, illustrates this, right?
Perfectly. She initially felt intense anger, rage even, wishing the shooter dead. Her therapist created a safe space for her, didn't judge it, just allowed her to lean into her anger.
And what happened through that process?
Eventually, by fully allowing the anger, it started to lessen. It transformed into grief. And that led to her healing significantly without ever forgiving the shooter.
So methods like exploring revenge fantasies safely, of course.
Yes, very safely. Maybe hitting a pillow or using art, they can be ways to embrace anger as part of emotional processing. But big caveat, it's not for everyone and absolutely requires safety and often professional guidance.
Got it. So if anger can be a key, what about shame? The sources paint that very differently. Yeah, shame is presented as more of a destructive lock. Brene Brown's definition is spot on. The intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
And when shame is dominant, the question, who's to blame, often points inward for the survivor.
Very often, yes. Survivors internalize the blame, leading to that crushing belief, I deserved what happened to me.
How on earth do you challenge something that deep-seated? The story of Owen was quite powerful here.
It really was. Omen was abused by his mother as a very young child, just 3 years old, and grew up believing he was bad.
And the therapist didn't just tell him he wasn't bad.
No, telling often isn't enough. She showed him. She had him visualize himself back then at 3, tiny, maybe holding a teddy bear. Then compare that image to his adult self.
Ah, to highlight the power difference, the helplessness.
Exactly. Seeing that stark contrast allowed him to finally grasp his helplessness at the time. It let him blame his mother and embrace his anger at her, which was a huge step in his progress.
That's a fascinating technique. And it counters how often others benefit from the survivor taking the blame, right?
Absolutely. The sources warn that perpetrators and other self-interested parties often use manipulative methods like blame shifting, victim blaming, and gaslighting. These tactics reinforce the survivor's shame.
So a key part of healing is realistically assessing your own capability back then.
Crucial. Acknowledging what you actually could or couldn't do at the time of the trauma. And importantly, if you do accept some responsibility for your own actions, not the trauma itself, but maybe how you reacted later, it should lead to productive guilt about those actions, not destructive shame about your fundamental worth.
Guilt versus shame, that's a critical distinction.
Huge. And shame absolutely must be addressed before you can even consider forgiving others or even yourself. It's a major roadblock.
This whole discussion really makes you think about the bigger picture. How do our cultural backgrounds, our societal structures, influence this whole expectation around forgiveness?
That's a massive piece of the puzzle, and the sources explore it really well. The dive into different religious perspectives is particularly illuminating.
Showing it's not monolithic.
Not at all. In Buddhism, for instance, forgiveness is elective, not required. It's seen more like gently making space between knots of yarn, focusing on clear seeing, not a forced outcome.
And Christianity.
Views vary widely. Some believe only God can truly forgive. Others emphasize following Jesus' example, but might see forgiveness as one tool in the toolbox for healing, not the ultimate goal itself.
What about other faiths?
Well, for Jewish survivors, there might be a feeling of obligation to forgive if an offender asks 3 times, but that has to be understood alongside the deep impact of intergenerational trauma and anti-Semitism. In Hinduism, forgiveness, or kama, can be unilateral, freeing oneself from karmic debt, but it isn't typically presented as a requirement, like in some Christian interpretations.
And for Muslim clients,
Clinicians need to be really sensitive. Avoid pushing non-forgiveness too hard. Recognize the context of Islamophobia and offer diverse resources. It really underscores that even within a shared religion, the understanding and expectation of forgiveness can differ hugely.
so religion is one factor. What about power imbalances in society?
That's another critical layer. The sources state it bluntly. If an offender has more societal power, the example given is a white CEO accused by a black non-binary person, the survivor is just less likely to be believed.
And the legal system often doesn't help.
Sadly, no. The book describes the U.S. legal system as decidedly not trauma-informed. It often re-traumatizes victims by forcing them into public arenas where their credibility is attacked, navigating complex procedures.
Making reporting itself feel unsafe.
Exactly, which hinders justice.
And there was a particularly striking point made about gender expectations.
Yes, women are expected to forgive, even if it kills them.
That's incredibly stark.
It is. The author shares her father's advice when she was 13 about how she should avoid rape, putting the onus entirely on her, not on perpetrators or society.
Reflecting a broader societal issue.
Reflecting a patriarchal ideology, yeah, where women are socialized to have superior relational skills like empathy and conflict resolution, often meaning they're expected to smooth things over, even at their own expense.
And women who don't comply, who express anger or set boundaries.
They get labeled cold, angry, bitch. This pressure for women to offer inauthentic forgiveness can be a way to just maintain oppressive social norms. As Audre Lorde wrote, for women, anger threatens annihilation.
That's heavy. But there was a counterpoint about self-defense.
Yes, citing Impact Chicago, which teaches self-defense. Their data shows that a woman who fights back gains an 86% chance of avoiding the rape and incurs little chance of additional injury. It highlights the power of agency versus forced compliance.
Okay, so if forgiveness is elective, potentially harmful when forced, influenced by culture and power, how should survivors respond to people who do push forgiveness? And what do the actual paths to recovery look like?
Good questions. The sources acknowledge that people advocating for forgiveness often have varied intentions. Some genuinely want to help, but might be acting out of their own discomfort with seeing someone in pain.
Or they have this idea that forgiveness means taking your power back.
Right, maybe by feeling superior to the offender, which isn't really true empowerment. So how can survivors respond? Sasha's story is a good example.
He initially cut off his family.
Yeah, to protect them from his pain. But when he reconnected, he set clear boundaries. He told his aunt something like, "I'm glad forgiveness helped you, but it's not what I need right now. Please don't discuss it with me again."
And how did the aunt react?
She respected it, and it actually became a supportive ally. It shows boundary setting can work.
So survivors can assert their needs directly.
Yes. They can say things like, "I am a good, loving, and strong person, regardless of my ability or willingness to forgive." Or, "I don't need to see myself as having more or less value than offenders. I need to see myself as having value despite them." It reclaims their narrative.
And the book actually encourages welcoming unforgiveness.
It does, which sounds counterintuitive, but the logic is sound. Forcing yourself to forgive when you're not ready is like the author's analogy of forcing herself to read books she didn't like.
It just led to shame and reading less.
Exactly. Whereas accepting that maybe some books won't be finished, a more lenient approach reduced the shame and actually increased her engagement with reading overall. Same idea with forgiveness, accepting non-forgiveness can be more productive than forcing it.
So instead of focusing on forgiveness, the path forward involves emotional processing.
That's the umbrella term, yes. Moving from emotional disturbance towards resolution. It's vital because, as the sources say, you usually can't think your way out of trauma. You have to feel your way through.
Meaning allowing those difficult emotions, rage, fear, grief.
Allowing yourself to fully experience them, yeah. And the interesting thing is how they can transform over time if you allow them. Rage might soften into frustration. Fear might become more manageable anxiety. Shame can lessen into insecurity.
Okay, so what does that processing actually look like? What are the practical methods?
It can take many forms. Sharing your trauma story as safe, supportive context, obviously. Writing letters to offenders that you never actually send.
Cathartic release.
Exactly. Connecting with art or music that evokes those emotions. Exploring those revenge fantasies we mentioned, but again, safely and with support. Trying guided meditations focused on emotion. Or engaging in trauma-informed movement.
Like yoga or dance.
Yeah, yoga, dance, even just shaking. The key is noticing and embracing the physical sensations that come with the emotions. Those sensations are the language of your emotions.
But always with that foundation of safety.
Always. Forgiveness may not be required to recover from trauma, but safety is. That's the mantra.
What about self-forgiveness? Is that different?
Yes, that's a specific case. Self-forgiveness applies when you are the one who caused harm, when your actions hurt someone else.
So it's about your own actions, not what was done to you.
Right. It involves releasing negative feelings toward yourself, practicing self-compassion, and really accurately assessing your responsibility. Again, distinguishing guilt, I did something bad, from shame, I am bad.
And if you determine you weren't actually responsible.
Then self-forgiveness isn't needed. It's about honest appraisal.
So the overall message seems to be about trusting the process, even if it's messy.
Pretty much. Trust the process, even though, as the author admits, that phrase can feel annoying sometimes, even for therapists. But the core truth is, there's no one-size-fits-all approach here.
Everyone's journey is unique.
Totally unique. And healing rarely happens in a vacuum. It happens within relationships, could be friends, family, partners, animals, colleagues, therapists. Connection is key.
And you mentioned a whole list of specific therapeutic methods.
Yeah, the sources point to quite a few evidence-based approaches that can help, whether forgiveness is part of the picture or not. Things like EMDR.
Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
That's the one. Helps reprocess disturbing experiences. There's also EFT, or tapping, mindfulness meditation, NRM, which is great for complex trauma.
Pelvic floor physical therapy was mentioned too. That seems specific.
It addresses how trauma is held in the body, sometimes called the body's natural guardian. Then there's sensorimotor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, both body-focused, trauma-conscious yoga method, TCTSY, trauma-focused CBT, and various support groups.
So lots of different tools available.
Lots of pathways to healing, focusing on mind and body.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground on such an important and often really sensitive topic.
It's definitely complex.
Yeah, and it's clear the question of forgiveness and trauma recovery is way more nuanced than the simple yes or no it often gets reduced to. It really challenges conventional wisdom.
And highlights those critical pillars: safety, self-worth, and the need for a truly personalized approach.
The author's own wrap-up felt very powerful in illustrating this.
It did. She's very open about not having forgiven her father. Describes him emotionally as if he never existed, and even wished he died sooner because his death freed the family from his control. That's raw, but is her truth.
And her mother.
More complicated there. No anger or resentment now. She's come to see her mother as this sickly, lonely little girl, shaped by her own unaddressed trauma.
So understanding replaced the anger.
Understanding shifted her perception, yeah. It allowed her shame to dissipate. But, and this is the crucial point, that understanding did not automatically equal forgiveness.
Reinforcing that core message again.
Exactly. We can recover with or without forgiveness. Her journey is living proof of that possibility.
So, thinking about our listeners, what does this all mean for you if you're taking this in?
Well, perhaps it's about giving yourself permission to find your own path to healing, free from that external pressure to forgive if it doesn't feel right or helpful for your recovery right now.
It might also mean really reevaluating what safety looks and feels like for you, physically, emotionally, relationally.
And maybe embracing anger not as something bad to be squashed, but as a potential ally, a protector, a source of energy on your journey.
Yeah. Which leads us to a final thought to kind of leave people with.
If trauma healing isn't necessarily about hitting a predetermined target like forgiveness, if it's more about creating enough safety to truly feel, process, and integrate your experiences and emotions,
then what new possibilities might open up for your own healing journey?
and maybe just as importantly, how might that deeper understanding change the way you show up for others on their journeys?